The Premier League is back, and as far as West Ham United Football Club are concerned, little to nothing has changed. Welcome to episode 2 of the Mod Pod, the brand new Knees Up Mother Brown podcast in which the KUMB team discuss the latest events at West Ham and the wider world of football. This week, I'm delighted to be joined by the usual selection of reprobates and ne'er-do-wells from the forum, with the exception of Chalks and DL, who are unable to make tonight's show, plus tonight's special guest. He is a BBC writer who's best known for writing about horse racing and football, although he also dips his feet into the worlds of snooker and darts from time to time. He's a Twitter sensation, where he's known as Honest Frank, with nearly 50,000 followers, and of course, he is a big West Ham United fan. I'd like to express my thanks for coming onto the show, and a big welcome, big KUMB welcome to Mr. Frank Keogh. How you doing, Frank?
It was great after that. I feel $1 million.
That's as good as it gets, mate. That's it, I'm afraid. I note from Twitter you had a busy sporting schedule yesterday. Did you happen to watch anything anywhere close to being as tedious and uninspiring as West Ham's match against Wolves?
Yeah, I mean, I caught the game. I don't know about you guys, but I've been watching with the fake sound, which I've quite enjoyed. And then I went over to the one without sound, and that probably gave me an idea of what it might have been like if it was reality. Because I did wonder if that game had been played with a crowd, I'd imagine that the crowd wouldn't have been that happy with the performance. So it would have been interesting to see what happened at the end of the game.
Did anyone notice? I don't know if this is correct, but I did read it on the forum. Someone said that there was actually canned booing being played at the West Ham game.
Should have been.
Madness.
I thought it was the chairman.
I think you probably could have heard that from hundreds of miles away. But yeah, so joining us from the team this week, we've got Bristol Hammer, Rio, Gnome, and the Pink Palermo. Back again for the second episode of the Mod Pod. Coming up on the show tonight, anyway, let me tell you just a brief rundown of what we're going to be talking about. David Moyes spoke of massive motivation and positivity ahead of the game, but we were rather too easily down by Wolves on Saturday at the London Olympic Stadium in an Adama Traore-inspired defeat. We'll be talking about that in a while. We'll also be looking back at the other games in the opening rounds of Premier League Part 2 and discussing the main talking points. After that, we'll be learning a little bit more about this week's special guest who'll be quizzed by the panel before looking ahead to Tuesday night's trip to Tottenham, who drew 1-1 with Manchester United in their first game. So let's crack on with our first topic of debate of the show. We are, of course, we can really start nowhere else than yesterday's game against Wolves. Where to start? Should we start with the team selection, Briz? And tell me what you thought about that. Did Moisey get it right, or what do you think?
I was a bit surprised, actually. I think we know that we didn't know that Traore was going to come on. We could have started. It could have come on at half time. It could have come on later. And I don't think we set up. I mean, Moyes admitted at the beginning that he knew that was the threat, and yet we didn't seem to set up to kind of deal with him in any way, shape or form. I think it was really disjointed. It looked like a real gap between defence, midfield, and then whoever was, playing in attack, even though we didn't have any proper forwards out on the pitch. And the side just looked bereft of confidence. It just really didn't know what to do.
Yeah, we spoke about it on the live feed yesterday, and everyone, I think we were all saying the same thing, that once Traore comes on, that's going to be the game changer. And Moyes didn't really react, Rio, did he, when the substitution was made?
No, he did his usual. He hung on for about 5 or 6 minutes, possibly longer, and by then, game over. We called it. It wasn't rocket science. We could all see it coming. And as per usual, Moyes just sits back and lets it happen.
Who do we Who do we think was to blame for the defeat overall? No, would you say that Moyes was at fault for his selection, or do you think the players need to take the brunt of the blame for what happened in the second half there?
A bit of both. We can look sort of deeply at what is fundamentally wrong with the club and the way the club is run, and that's sort of a wider sort of malaise and all that. But Moyes put the team out there. One of the discussions we were having is that yesterday was that both goals were sort of replays of earlier chances.
Yeah,
and it just seemed to me that there was a lack of leadership on the pitch. When Traore first got across into the box, nobody sort of turned around and said, right, look, we've got to stop that, make sure he doesn't do that again. And predictably, he got it again. And the second goal, marvellous finish, admittedly, but it came, 4 or 5 minutes after somebody had I think a corner came across where somebody was completely unmarked again at the back post. And okay, slightly different build-up, slightly different situation. But, as anyone who's played, if it happens once, somebody should be shouting there saying, look, we've got one over there, let's sort this out. And, as Chris said, it looked like the defence had been training together, the midfield had been training together, the striker had probably been training on his own. And it was sort of like expecting all three elements to sort of having not to work in isolation, and just as I say, disjointed. There was no cohesion, no creativity. I suppose Moyes can only pick what he's got. The fact that Haller was injured, and just revealed the sort of paucity of striking options we got at the club.
Yeah,
goes back again to the wider malaise of our transfer policy and scouting policy. We're beginning to wonder how bad must the Jetty be in training. He's not shown anything in the few matches that he's played in, but if you're not even getting a sniff when you're arguably the only fit striker at the club at any point, then it's just thoroughly dispiriting, I'm afraid.
it was a very strange setup, Pinky, yesterday. And Ngakia, I think, was probably the biggest surprise, coming in at right back with Fredericks believed to be fully fit once again. Declan Rice being moved back into the centre of defence, where he's barely played all season, and then the option of Antonio up front. I think we discussed during the game that it didn't look like that we'd had 3 months off, and it looked like that the team had only been back together for a couple of weeks. Can you put your finger on exactly what went wrong and why you think that was?
Yeah, but I think if we're into the blame game, which frankly that's our stock in trade as football supporters. First up, collective responsibility. You win as a team, you lose as a team. And by a team, I don't just mean the 11 guys on the park. I mean the full matchday squad, the coaching staff, the boardroom, the whole kit and caboodle. We looked unprepared, unprofessional at times, in my opinion, because let's not forget, these are not pub players. These are highly paid, top-class professional sportsmen. So these aren't the dog and duck just turning out, having done a shift laying bricks or whatever it might be.
Yeah.
These guys have got nothing else to do all day but prepare for football games. What I'd quite like to know is, when did Haller actually get injured? And was he part of the setup all week in training?
Mm-hmm.
Was an integral part of the manager's plans? And was it a late withdrawal? Because that might explain some of the team shape and so forth. I think we're at that time of year normally when managers start to send club chairman messages about the calibre of the squad. And the fact that yesterday David Moyes had 9 substitutes that he could pick from, but actually, he'd have been better off giving any one of us on a call, frankly. But do you send that message when you're in a relegation dogfight, or do you actually win the dogfight first then send the message. So for me, I can understand why he's played Jeremy and Ngakia for 2 reasons. One, I think he's probably the best fit right back at the club at the minute. I have zero confidence in Frederick's ability to defend. And I think the modern obsession with pace, it's all about pace and speed and all the rest of it. Yes, Fredericks will get up and down the pitch quicker than anybody else in the team. But can he defend? Does he know his job as a defender? And I think we found out yesterday that perhaps he doesn't. So I think Moyes, it's almost a last-ditch attempt to persuade Ngakia that he's got a future at West Ham, because Tuesday could be his final showing for us. After that, he's out of contract before we play again.
That's right.
And he could be gone.
Yeah.
So I think Moyes is trying to do things for both the short, medium and long term. But I think there's a lack of preparedness whereby, surely in training, when they think they're going to have a lineup, they say, right, let's assume that player X is injured in the 2nd minute. What do we go to now? And the fact that we don't, we started without Haller. There was no plan B. And far too often with West Ham United, there never is.
I think you alluded to, I think it was you who alluded to that on the forum, that when you look at the subs bench, as you've just mentioned there were, I'm just looking at the bench now. Randolph, obviously a goalkeeper, so he's immaterial really, but Balbuena, who we know has been dropped for making rickets in the past. You've got Ben Johnson, who is yet to start. Lanzini, whose form has been woeful since coming back from injury. Jack Wilshere, who is yet to come back from injury. Ayeti, who you mentioned, who £8 million spent on a player who has yet to score a goal, hasn't even looked like scoring a goal. Silva, another player who's not played. You're absolutely right. I think it's when you need a game changer, Yarmolenko perhaps is the only one on there that's possibly had it within him this season to turn a game around. Frank, you saw the game yesterday, I believe. You watched the match?
Yeah.
What was your summary? What did you make of it?
I think the nail was hit on the head there about the Haller situation. Once he was out of the team, the whole formation and everything they were on the back foot, because he's so important. I think you're right that something must have happened quite late on, because he seemed to be part of the plans. I think he scored in one of the friendlies in advance. And I was really interested that Declan Rice, he was told about going into central defence during the week. So we've had 3 months to prepare for this match, which has been the focus. They knew that Wolves are playing Traore and all those elements. And yet it seems as though it was only during the week that it was decided to put Rice in defence.
Yeah.
And David Moyes talked about the difficulties of being creative and going forward. Well, when you had no Haller and then Rice is in defence, where he probably needed to be to cope with Traore, but then you didn't have Rice in that midfield position. So I think if Haller doesn't come back, they're in really serious trouble. And it's a problem that West Ham have had all season and for so many seasons. I think Haller scored 7 times this year. Who's the next best scorer? Probably Snodgrass. No one, I think, possibly with the exception of Marlon Harewood, scored more than 15 goals for West Ham in the last 20 years.
Yeah.
And having somebody who can score goals is so important. That they have scored so few goals this season, and I feel a bit for Antonio, because he needs to be a support man up front, doesn't he? Really? So I think when we look forward to the Tottenham game, it's really important if Haller's fit, and it hasn't really been explained, has it, what the situation is with Haller as far as
No, it hasn't, has it? We really are in the dark with regards to that. It's quite ironic actually there that you're mentioning the lack of a goal scorer, given that we're frequently told that David Sullivan has bought about 100 strikers. Or I'm exaggerating now, but you know, you get the picture since 2010, but not. It's very rarely one of them seems to find the net. Even when we seem to spend big on players like Carroll, it's an unmitigated disaster.
Yeah, I mean, I think just on Carroll, that was a slightly different situation, and I think on a going day, Carroll's a good player, but because of his injury record, that's a similar kind of signing to Wilshere, and others. Hallow, I think, was a good signing. Based on everything that was known at the time, and he could still go on to be a good player for West Ham. But I think the fact that once he's out of the squad, you're out of the team, you're talking about so little other options, shows that something's wrong recruitment-wise.
4 games in a row against Wolves now. We've lost 4 in a row. We haven't scored in those 4 games. They've scored 8 goals. They really seem to have our number, don't they, Briz? You seem to be on mute there at the moment, Briz. I can see your lips moving, but there's nothing coming out.
Apologies, a bit of a cough, so I thought I'd mute for the time being. But I was going to say, who hasn't got our number at the moment?
Yes, fair point. Fair point.
I mean, I was looking down at the stats yesterday, and we had 2 shots on target, 7 in total. And we're the home side. I mean, I'm not being funny. We've got Lanzini, Anderson, Bowen. You're looking on the pitch. We've got all that creativity who are supposed to get the ball into the forwards. We created nothing yesterday. We were on the back foot from the beginning. And if you're looking at somebody to blame for that, that's got to be the manager. You've got to say to him, what have you set your team up to do? What were your instructions going out there? Because Anderson naturally wants to get forward. Yesterday he was absolutely terrible. But again, who was any good yesterday? Totally. I mean, I'm looking around at the team and I'm thinking they just got shot of confidence, and that's got to come down to the manager. That's got to come down to the coaching squad, and ultimately it's also got to come down to the captain on the pitch. Mark Noble yesterday, I didn't see him talking to the players. Most of the game he was running around miles away from the ball, and he's got to stand up and take some responsibility. He's supposed to be Mr. West Ham. I'd like to see it on the pitch sometimes.
It's the form, unfortunately, hasn't improved since we came back, and that's, I think, since we beat Gillingham in the FA Cup 2-0 back in January. We've played 11 games, and our record reads lost 8, drawn 2, and with that solitary win against Southampton. We keep referring to, after the Tottenham and Chelsea games, a sequence of easier games to follow. But Pinky, again, I think you alluded to this yesterday. Are we in danger of thinking those games are going to be easier than they actually are?
Yeah, because...
And are we being too reliant on that?
What easy games? Where are the easy games? Because if there are any easy games, well, we've played 30 matches this season and we're sitting in 17th spot. So which are the teams left in the final 8 games that people think are going to be easy? It's an absolute nonsense. You know, other clubs might be looking at West Ham United and making the mistake of thinking, oh, it's only West Ham. And, you know, the classic being the likes of Aston Villa, who could look at us and go, if there's one team you want to finish the campaign against, and you need a win to stay up, pick one team. I reckon probably a dozen Premier League clubs would pick, let's have West Ham, because do you know what? There's a soft underbelly there. They're mentally fragile. It's not a great squad they've got currently. Let's go for them. And just to go back, if I can, to the Haller situation, I've got an outrageous theory forming in my head, which you might want to get legal before you broadcast this, Graham. But I'm just thinking in terms of timing. I just wonder if there's something in the clause with this previous club in terms of payments, whereby if we fall behind on payments, we can't play the player. Because undoubtedly by this time of year, the club would normally be banking next season's season ticket money, corporate money, and so forth. We know the club have announced a rights issue, which is yet to be completed. So I just wonder if there's maybe a 10 to 14 day cash flow issue that might prevent us from selecting certain players.
It would be very West Ham, wouldn't it?
I've got a little sneaking doubt there. So, Mr. Sullivan, if I'm calling you wrongly there, I apologise. I just offer it as fair comment and opinion, because we don't know what's up with the player.
Interesting point. Chalks, good to see you. How you doing, buddy?
Just having me dinner.
Lovely stuff. We're just picking the bones out of yesterday's defeat against Wolves. I take it you saw the game. What was your what are your thoughts looking back?
I don't know what everyone else has said. Probably pretty much the same, but didn't really look like we even wanted to be on the pitch. I thought Souček looked half decent. I thought Ngakia was shit. I don't care what anyone else tries to say. I thought he was absolute shit. If he's trying to play himself into another club, fucking do it in the reserves. Noble clearly wants to be there. I'd be surprised if there's any other player that really wants to be playing for us. I think the whole club is rotten from the top down, and we're seeing it. We all knew this was going to happen. We've all been looking forward to football coming back, and it comes back, and I'm enjoying watching all the other games. And then you get to our share of shit, and I'm just surprised. Last week I predicted we'd even get. I said we'd lose 5-1. I'm an idiot for even saying we get a goal. We're not going to.
Well, we'll come back to the predictions a little bit later in the show. You will, of course, be pleased to know that you're top of the prediction league. I can
I'll say
so much information by predicting the defeat. Well, you mentioned there that there's been plenty of other games since Wednesday. Let's just have a brief look back at those. We kicked off Rio on Wednesday, I think it was, wasn't it, with Villa and Sheffield United, and we started with an absolutely bizarre decision in that game. Is there anything else that's really stood out for you? Any players, any teams that are looking particularly good since they've come back?
I wouldn't say anyone has really stood out as being particularly good. I mean, far be it for me to pour scorn on our rivals and foes, but Sheffield United have provided the biggest batch of entertainment since the return. The comedy goal on Wednesday, there was an excellent piece of defending today. You've got to watch it. I think you missed today's game, haven't you, Greg?
I did, yeah, I did.
But, it's well worth a watch. Ender Stevens has produced some of the best defending you'll see from a Sheffield United side, possibly the whole season. It made our goal we conceded where Diop, I can't remember who it was, when Diop made that mess up.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah, it's not quite as bad as that, but it was comical. So fair play to Sheffield United to finally bring entertainment back into the Premier League.
Well, I look forward to catching up with that a bit later. Gnome, what stood out for you so far?
The goal that Neville was amusing. I mean, so I get it that 7 cameras were all blocked. Maybe Oliver was unsighted. The linesman should have had a view of it. Where were the VAR people? Someone along the line. The buck's got to stop with Oliver because, you can just imagine a sort of pile driver in the back of the net and going, that was close, wasn't it? Yeah. The other thing was we mentioned earlier on the crowd noise thing, and some of it's been quite impressive with the timing and how they've got the cheers going just at the right moment. There have been a few strange bits and pieces. The Arsenal game yesterday, Brighton Arsenal game, when Leno got that rather nasty knock.
Yeah.
And, he was obviously lying there. And, of course, that sort of thing, when the crowd sort of pick up on the fact that an injury is serious, it does tend to get muted and sort of quite quiet. But Watford fans apparently were watching, Brighton fans were watching a completely different game. And they obviously had the loop going all the way through. And they were sort of cheering going on. It's like, somebody needs to have they need to have a sort of low button sort of for those sort of moments. But sat there thoroughly depressed for about half an hour this afternoon watching Villa leading Chelsea, although that sort of ended better for us in the end. But the depressing thing was having to watch other games which impact on our league position. And hoping for results, you know. So
yeah, if you sort of looking at the other teams in and around us, it hasn't actually been that bad, has it? Norwich beaten, Villa beaten today, though they picked up a point earlier in the week. Bournemouth looked dreadful, I thought, yesterday against Palace. Watford, of course, picked up a point with a 93rd minute goal, I think it was. I think the only real disappointment, Frank, was the Brighton win yesterday. Again, another very late goal that secured all 3 points, and I think it was their first win in 2020 as well. Sorry, Frank, we've got you on mute at the moment. That's it.
That's all right, yeah. So I think Sheffield United probably, like West Ham, the lockdown came at a bad time for them. Well, it came at a bad time for all of us, didn't it? But West Ham played quite well before lockdown in some games. They played really well against Liverpool, didn't they?
Yes, we did, yeah.
And I think that the break hasn't been good for West Ham. And I think maybe what's happened with Sheffield United is it's given other managers a bit of time to work them out a bit more. So that might stop their momentum a little bit. I think some of the other teams have been poor. Norwich looked like a team who are going down. And I think Bournemouth looked like a team who are going down. And so I think that probably leaves West Ham, Villa and Watford as the three most likely, perm any one of those from the three. I did find it hilarious what happened in that Sheffield United match, because Hawkeye came out and said, despite all their various camera angles, this had never happened before where they couldn't see the ball properly in 9,000 previous incidents. And I did think to myself, what? It's a 9,000 to 1 shot, and it happens to be in the first game that came back. And it struck me as that something wasn't right about that. And I suspect that somebody who's probably been on furlough has come back in from their first day at the office and not had a particularly good day. But but yeah, so I think I'd like to think in terms of West Ham's performance that was a bad day at the office, and playing in the stadium with no crowd and everything takes a bit of getting used to, and they might actually be better at Tottenham.
Pinky, it really is a battle now. It seems to be fourth worst, doesn't it? Again, as we've said, as Frank said, then Norwich they look doomed, don't they? Bournemouth look probably even worse than we do, and Villa, as they have all season, have really struggled to score. Do you think it might be a case of, it's the fact that there are three teams worse than us? And again, did you see anything that sort of really particularly took your eye this weekend?
Yeah, I mean, I think we probably get away with it by virtue of the fact there are three teams worse than us, but we might not establish that until the very last day of the season. And, I believe it will come down to ourselves against Aston Villa, July the 26th, and winner takes all. And that kind of indicates where we are. It's going to take us to the very last game of the season, possibly the last kick of the season, to shake off a team that we're all looking at in Aston Villa and going, well, they're no great shakes. And yet it'll take us to the very last day of the season just to prove that we're slightly better than them. So I think that's a pretty sad indictment. In terms of game so far, my main concern is the callous disregard that the employers have of these players. There's no doubt in my mind the players from club to club are not fit. They are not fit. They are not to the standard you'd expect from professional sportsmen at this stage of a campaign.
Yeah.
So the first Arsenal game, we saw two injuries very early on. And again, if you're a player, and this is what you do to earn your crust, being used by a football club owner and a football competition as a gladiator, out you go, gladiators, because the emperors demand that they be entertained so they don't have to pay bills and so forth. So we had Maximus Noble yesterday leading us out. But that's, has anyone actually asked the players how they really feel about this? And that brings us to Watford, because Troy Deeney has an absolutely cast iron legitimate reason why he has to be very careful in terms of catching COVID-19, and it's the health of his child. Undoubtedly, if Deeney plays for Watford, they're a completely different team if he's missing. So the pressure on him to play just to keep his club and his frankly callous employer relatively wealthy is enormous. And I think when all this is done and dusted, I'd expect the PFA to bring football club owners and football authorities to book and say, this can't ever happen again. The players are being put under too much pressure purely because they get paid a truckload of money. But that's not the point. That won't keep Troy Deeney's child alive if he catches COVID-19. So that's the shocking thing for me here. It's just a callous disregard for player welfare. Terrible.
Some interesting points there, Pinky. I think we also saw David Sullivan display a callous disregard for the wearing of face masks during yesterday's game, which
that's
I
a good
noticed.
thing, though, Brian.
Sorry, what was that, Chalks?
That's a good thing, isn't it? I don't want to see that cunt with a mask on his face.
Well, I did notice shortly after that they advertised them for sale on the website, so I think it might have been a bit cynical. Chalks, apart from Mr. Sullivan, is there anyone who's particularly stood out for you in the last few days?
No, I mean, I get where the others are coming from with Bournemouth looking poor, and Norwich. Norwich did look poor, but at least they seem to show that they wanted to at least give it a go. We just, from the first minute, just didn't even look like we wanted to try, and that's what gets me. Other than that, it's the same old. It's the usual clubs that are doing better. I'm surprised today with Sheffield United, to be honest. But no, it's all. Look, it all comes back down to our lot, and our lot. We just don't really look like we want to do it.
I've got to say, sorry, Joe. I was just going to say, I think Sheffield United, they've certainly looked. They've had a great season, haven't they? But the team that, even though they've not played particularly well this season, I've been quite surprised at just how bad Arsenal have looked.
Yeah,
and you kind of wonder that. Breeze, if the season, had a little bit longer to go, could they possibly get sucked into the relegation battle? I mean, that's unheard of, isn't it?
Oh, they're looking really poor, really poor this season. And again, they've been in decline actually over the last couple of seasons, which I've revelled in, to be honest. But now they're looking really like a mid-table to lower mid-table team.
Yeah.
And again, it's the same story as with us, only on a bigger scale, really. The lack of investment, quality players, the lack of continuity in terms of, Wenger went and they brought the manager in, Unai Emery, and he went, and again you've got all that turmoil. And we're in about season 6 of that, and they're now starting to enter season 3 from it. So for me, you're absolutely right. I think they're going to get sucked down to the. I can't see them going back up to be challenging the top of the table for a couple of seasons.
Yeah, well, one to watch maybe next season. There's they could be about to experience a big fall from grace. Anyway, you never know. Fingers crossed. Okay, so enough about what we've seen already so far in the Premier League. I'd like to move on now to our next section of the show, which is where we're going to have a chat with our special guest. Frank, of course, as I mentioned at the top of the show, a BBC reporter who specialises in horse racing, the GGs and football, big West Ham fan. And what we usually do, Frank, at this time is just get the panel to ask you a question each. So I'm going to start with Rio tonight. Rio, what's your question for Frank?
Hi, Frank. Nice to meet you. It's probably going to be the easiest one. Why West Ham? And how big do you regret it?
So I feel a bit of a fraud because I wasn't born within the sound of Bow Bells. So I grew up near Luton, so Luton should have been my club, and they were kind of like my second club. But when I was growing up, I was very interested in goalkeepers, and Mervyn Day was the best young goalkeeper. So I loved watching him. And when I was very young, West Ham won the cup, and that was it from then. And I remember when West Ham got in the cup final again in 1980, my dad saying to me, well, it's very difficult to get tickets for the cup final, but I could try and blah, blah, blah. And I said, oh, don't worry, Dad, we've been in plenty of finals. It'll be, you know, don't worry about that. And they're in the League Cup final next year. But didn't get to that. And then about whenever it was, 25 years later, did get to a final at Cardiff when they lost to Liverpool. So yeah, I don't regret it. Although it's obviously not been, you know, a trophy-laden spell, and it's quite funny sometimes when you speak to fans of other clubs. My brother's a Chelsea fan, and for a large part of our growing up, we were in a similar boat where both teams weren't brilliant, and of course then Chelsea had this great success, including with some ex-West Ham players. But when you ask other fans, you know, what are their greatest moments or experiences or whatever, and I'm thinking, oh, right, okay. Well, it was 4-0 at Chelsea in 1986 and that kind of thing. And so our experiences as West Ham fans and the best moments as a West Ham fan are very different to others, aren't they? You know,
Yeah.
Actually, one of the best experiences was losing to Liverpool, but it was a game we lost. You know, it was a great day, great performance. So yeah, that's how I came to support them.
Gnome, what about you? What's your question for Frank?
Well, I was hoping to get some of the dirt on Mr. Keogh because my lovely girlfriend once worked in the same office as you as the BBC, but she said you wouldn't remember her, but she said all she said was he was a really nice guy. Why do you want to know? So that was that stopped all the blackmail I had planned for this.
Your girlfriend sounds absolutely lovely.
She is.
When are you gonna marry her, Gnome?
Oh no, she's going to watch this. No. So you've moved up to Salford. So so obviously getting to see the Irons at least at home in the flesh is difficult. With all your other commitments, are there any occasions where you can sort of pull the BBC card and get into to see away games? You know, if we're away at Liverpool or Man United or Man City, is that something you can? And I don't mean this in a sort of anyway. Just is it something you can manage to do?
I mean, I can do it on a working basis. I mean, sometimes, if I'm honest with you, I prefer to go as a fan. It's obviously a whole different experience. It's interesting because you get the insight behind the scenes and speaking to the managers, and that's always good.
Yeah, I used to.
Yeah, well, quite, yeah. So you know the drill there. You kind of look at the fixture list in a slightly different way, and you're looking at clubs that are towards the north or whatever. Like Huddersfield was a good trip when they were in the Premier League, just as a place to go, and some nice pubs around. And well, of course, we don't know when we're going to go back to matches, do we? And so,
True.
If the worst does happen, and I spoke to a friend of mine who's a season ticket holder at West Ham the other night, and he said that he was very glad that West Ham weren't in the FA Cup because he said it'd be typical West Ham. He got to the FA Cup final and he could understand.
It would, yeah, very good. Yeah.
And actually, if West Ham do get relegated, I suspect that there won't be big crowds at football matches, certainly for the first part of next season, if not for all of it. So that might, on the one hand, that will mean missing out on trips to some new and places, but also it may not be quite as bad unless it's a period of seasons in the Championship. But yeah, so yeah, no, it definitely changes things.
I've got one supplementary question, Frank.
Yeah.
You like your horses? You got any tips?
Yeah, I will have. What should I say to you?
You didn't get Nando Parado last week, Frank, did you?
Well, do you know the funny thing about that? So, for those who don't know, this was the biggest prize winner at Royal Ascot ever yesterday. It was 150 to 1. And I really fancied a horse in that race that actually beat Nando Parado last time. And so Nando Parado was 5th. The horse I backed called Existent was 3rd. And the one that was 4th won today as well. So I'm feeling a bit hard done by there. But
yeah, forget a tip though, Frank.
rest assured, if I get 150 to 1 tip, you'll be the first to know.
Chalks, have you got a question for Frank?
Yeah, I think it's a question that seems to be doing the rounds quite a lot at the moment. Would you take relegation if it meant the sale of the club at the end of the season?
Wow, that's a question. I'm probably. I mean, I had a reasonable amount to do with David Gold, David Sullivan, particularly soon after they took over. Less so now, just from a work point of view. I wouldn't say that I was a complete backer of them as a fan, but in terms of their stewardship of the club, I would say, well, in their defence, be slightly careful what you wish for, because if you remember at the time the takeover happened, the other rival bidder was Tony Fernandez, who is a nice fellow, but he hasn't really pulled up any trees at QPR. And I think the third party involved was the guy who ended up at Leeds or involved there, and that all went pear-shaped. So if you look round at other clubs, they're not all being run in a gilt-edged standard. And I know all the reasons why some fans don't like the board, and I do think that Karen Brady coming out and saying that the season should have been null and voided has caused a lot of resentment towards West Ham. And when I was growing up, West Ham used to be most people's favourite second club, and that's not the case anymore. West Ham are actually not liked by a lot of other for various reasons, and I don't think Karen Brady has helped that situation. I don't think her column in The Sun really helps there. So getting back to the question, no, I think you have to try and stay in the league and hope that things will improve from there. But you do have to get to the stage where you say, how long can the board be given where you run out of time? When they took over 10 years ago, they said that European football was going to be a target. If you look at the league positions in that time, they're not really any better than the 10 years previously. They've been in the stadium for 4 years, I think now, and it hasn't improved. And one of the big selling points of going to the stadium was the increased capacity, the increased revenue, becoming a bigger club with bigger options. So clearly there are questions to be asked there, but I think you have to try and stay where you are, and then move on from there. So I don't agree that going down and the club being sold would be a good thing.
Thank you, Chalks. Thank you, Frank. Mr. Palermo, over to you, sir.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sticking with girl power. You mentioned Karen there, so I'm going to go with girl power here. It's actually different sports, Frank.
Oh, yeah.
If you look at horse racing and darts,
yes,
they're two sports in which females can compete in the same event as males, essentially.
Yeah.
But in terms of who will leave the biggest impression on their sport when the history books get written, would it be Kieran Fallon or Fallon Sherrock? So one from horse racing, one from darts. Who's the game changer?
Fallon Sherrock, this is a kind of classic modern day phenomenon, is that Fallon Sherrock is the game changer because she won the pivotal match that got all the headlines. But the real game changer in darts is Lisa Ashton, who qualified from hundreds of people. I was there at Wigan at this leisure centre where they all had little booths in a sports hall and played some games during one day. And she beat all those guys to get through to the main tour. So she's the game changer in sport. In horse racing, I think the game changer jockey-wise will be a jockey called Holly Doyle, who had a 33-1 winner at Royal Ascot. Her boyfriend Tom Marquand is a jockey as well, and I think all the good judges think that she could potentially be in contention to be champion jockey in the future. And in Ireland, there's a jump jockey called Rachel Blackmore who's been second in the jump jockeys championship. So in horse racing, it genuinely is, you know, they are starting to compete, and you can tell how well they're doing, because if you speak to punters when they go to the races, it's some punters are backing female jockeys specifically, whereas maybe 10 or 20 years ago, it was that, you know, that Birds on it or whatever. So I think that's changed quite a lot in those two sports. Yeah, interesting.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you, Pinky. Thank you, Frank. Last but very much not least, Breeze, what's your question?
Well, I'm sticking with girl power as well, but mine's about the women's football team. So Jack Sullivan seems to be running them reasonably well at the moment, and I just wonder what your views were on whether that's ever going to do anything more than what it's doing at the moment, and what that bodes for the future for West Ham, because we understand that when Mr. Sullivan retires, he's leaving it to his kids. So I just wondered your views on that, really.
Yeah, well, the first thing I'll say about Jack Sullivan, he is a proper West Ham fan, you know, and I know there are lots of suggestions of nepotism, the fact that he's been involved in the women's club, but he's probably been quite a good force in the sense that he's been the BBC Three series largely showed the club in a positive light. Probably becomes quite an attractive team to join. I think ticket sales were good when they were in the cup final, so I think it's potentially an area where West Ham could do really well in. Where the long-term future of the club is fascinating, isn't it? Because David Gold and David Sullivan are not young men, and they've always insisted that they wouldn't sell the club, you know, cash out, asset strip, that kind of thing, with the suggestion that Jack Sullivan would be able to take over. I don't know with that. I mean, Jack's still young, but he's learning a lot all the time. Whether West Ham fans would be happy with Jack Sullivan in charge, I don't know. But I think, as with all these things, it depends on the things on the pitch, doesn't it? And if we go back to some of the protests, you know, the big protests years ago, we were playing very badly. And then when West Ham were playing well under Bilic, and players like Dimitri Payet were playing really well, very is actually said about the board at that time. So I think often with fans, when they're unhappy with a club, it's directly related to what's going on the pitch. So I think the difficulty generally is that West Ham are no further forward than when David Moyes was brought in the previous time. And I think the worry would be what the long-term structure and plan is for the club.
It is interesting, actually. Thanks, Breeze. Thanks, Frank. That Hammers United have released a couple of statements in the last couple of weeks. The supporters group that were behind the protests back in January and February, to say that although the protests are on hold for now, that they intend to come back with a vengeance. Once football resumes.
Just to come back on one point, which again is probably an unpopular view. There clearly are people who are unhappy with the board, and there is the Hammers United group are very unhappy. One of the key points of contention is the fact that the move took place to go to the London Stadium. That has happened. You know, it's not going to change. You go over to Green Street and there's flats where the ground used to be. So I kind of see that as a redundant point of contention, really. It's happened. You need to move on. But that does seem to be a very big point of it. And I know it taps into a lot of fans' feelings. I'm sure a lot of us would love to go for a drink in the Boleyn or the Black Lion or whatever. But that's gone. Yeah. Well, and some are closed, aren't they? The Victoria's shut and others. And I think I saw Ken's Cafe's closed now.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So I understand why people are upset that it's happened. I think the way that it was handled was slightly disingenuous. I remember there was a poll that went out to fans and the questions were slightly loaded and the result was slightly loaded as a result. But I do think that has happened, and I think if fans have genuine bones of contention, they need to focus on things that they can change rather than what.
Okay, thank you very much, Frank, for your candid answers there. I'm going to move it on now to West Ham's next outing, which, as we all know, is against our dear old friends from White Hart Lane this Tuesday night. There will be, of course, no fans inside the stadium. And West Ham haven't actually got a very bad record against Tottenham, especially away in recent seasons. We all recall Michail Antonio and that incredible celebration when he scored the winning goal last season. Ravel Morrison, of course, Modibo Maiga have all left their mark at the Lane in recent years in vital wins. But can we do it again this year? And, you know, it probably is even more important that we get something there this year. Pinky, let's start with you. What do you think about Tuesday's game? Have we got a chance? Can we get anything?
Yeah, I mean, always a chance, and yes, we can get something. You know, let's be clear. This is not a terrific Tottenham Hotspur squad either. And for all the beef we've got with our board in terms of are they spending enough, Tottenham Hotspur, they've got a mighty new stadium, fabulous. But it's assets on the pitch that football supporters pay to see.
Yeah. And
just looking down through their squad, you know, the way they're lined up against Man United, I'm sorry, but if you played against Eric Dyer, you've got a chance. It's that simple. He isn't any good. Okay, he wouldn't get in our team. Okay, so you know
that's a damning indictment.
Yes, put it in perspective. You know, so you're looking at their defensive capability that started against Man United, not so good. I think we'll see a change. I think we'll see probably both Vertonghen and Alderweireld start for them on Tuesday night. So I think he'll change his centre backs. But looking at it, you know, Winks is a tidy player in the middle of the park. I think he is a good footballer. Mm-hmm. The threats from them obviously are going to come from Son and Kane. Kane, no, you had a look at him, you know, last week. He's not quite as overweight as I am, but he's not far off. And again, it's the classic case of, is he really going to give 100% running out the final games of this season when really his mind is already on next season? So with that in mind, we have a chance. Having said that, all of the flaws in our setup, where are we going to get a goal? And I think the best performance we've put in recent years over at the Lane was the Ravel Morrison match, if I can call it that, where we played without a recognised striker. We went with a so-called false nine. Plenty of runners from midfield. Tottenham were totally confused that night, and I'd be tempted to try something similar again on Tuesday. You know, especially if there's no Haller. But say, do you know what? Let's try something different, because what have we got to lose? What do we have to lose?
Yeah. Rio, do you agree with Mr. Palermo? Do you think we've got a chance on Tuesday?
In an ideal world, I'd agree with him 100%. But I just don't think that we showed the application and work rate needed on Saturday. Introducing new tactics and kind of plans as we did in the Allardyce 3-1 game, or 3-0 game, sorry. I just can't see that being implemented in time. Again, I think another factor is the support. The lack of support is going to be a major issue for us, because when you go up the lane, we have a vociferous, ferocious support behind us. You know, we want more than anything. That's going to be missing, and that normally drives the team on. We're missing that. I just think we're on a bit of hiding at nothing. I don't rate Tottenham. I'm not a big fan of Mourinho. I think he's a manager from 10 years ago. Sadly, we've got a manager from 15. So yeah, I'm not confident at all.
Briz, would you agree with that summary? Do you think Rio mentioned the lack of support there, which is actually a very good point, because I guess teams have been bemoaning the fact that they're going to lose that advantage in their home fixtures. But could that work against us in this away fixture in this instance?
You know, I'd love us to nick a point or 3 points against Spurs. I think last time it was lasagna gate. This time they got COVID-19 already lined up, haven't they, really, for the excuse? So I'd love us to nick 3 points against them. I have to be honest, I can't see it. I think Rio's bang on. I think that the crowd getting behind the team. I think yesterday as well, going back to yesterday, I think that was a really important point, that some of those players out there would have got a right rocket off the crowd and would have upped their game. And without that peer pressure on them, I just don't think that it takes something away from the game. And so I'm a bit disappointed, actually, that we go back to a season like this at a disadvantage, you know, because it's always been for us. Our support has been amazing.
Thank you, Briz. Chalks, bang on cue, actually. I was just about to come to you. What do you think about Tuesday? Do you think that we can take something from White Hart Lane?
No, I think they'll give us a good hiding. I could see where Pinky was coming from until he said the word runners, and that's it. We haven't got anybody that's prepared to run. Not even Antonio. Antonio looked like he's been enjoying the time off. He looked a little bit overweight, as we all are, but we're not being paid 70, 80 grand a week. No, I think that they'll toy with us on Tuesday. I think that we might hold out maybe for half hour or so, but I think as soon as they score, we've got no plan B. We don't really have a plan A, but I think that they'll score when they want to score, unfortunately. And I am top of the prediction league, so.
This is very true. We'll be coming to that in just a moment. Gnome, are you with Pinky and Rio? Do you think we've got a chance of getting something, or are you firmly sitting on Chalk's side of the fence?
I'm probably erring towards Pinky and Rio. I think we've got a chance, partly because 50 odd years of supporting West Ham. We always seem to get a result just when you think things are really, really sort of terrible, and you can't see where the next wind's coming from. Suddenly the result comes up. Right? It's happened so many times.
Yep.
There's that. There's the fact that Saturday really, really should have rung alarm bells, and I sincerely hope somebody's been sitting there thinking, right, what didn't we do on Saturday? What can we do to make sure we do it? So there is that. There's also the fact that, as was alluded earlier on, I think Rio alluded to it, was Tottenham aren't very good.
Yeah.
The main threat, Pinky said the main threat, Song and Kane. Well, Kane I thought was pretty anonymous the other night. First I knew he was on the pitch was a late free kick outside the box that he got given. Son is back. He's a nasty little player as well. He's a good player, but again we saw the snidey little hand in the face a couple of times and a couple of feet left in. So, but he's a good player. But the guy who actually scored the goal, and I know it was a De Gea error, but he's the one that worries me more than anything else, because Bergwijn, as they pronounce it, I think, he had a bit of pace, and as we saw with Traore, we don't like that. Mm-hmm. So there are all these things, for and against. And this not having a crowd thing, it's a great leveller. So I think Tottenham might be able to take a point off us.
Looking at the history of this particular fixture, West Ham have 51 wins, Tottenham 66. So we've got a little bit of catching up to do, and there's also been 37 draws. Frank, Can West Ham make it win number 52 on Tuesday night? That's for you, Frank.
Yeah, I'm just weighing it up. The one thing I would say is that Tottenham had a pretty shoddy lockdown, didn't they? They managed the whole furlough thing terribly.
Yes.
And Dele Alli was penalised for an offensive gesture, and the players were caught improperly social distancing. The only sort of high spot was fair play to Harry Kane. He's sponsored Leyton Orient shirts, hasn't he?
Yeah.
I actually think the crowd thing might be more of an issue for West Ham when they play Chelsea. So I think West Ham would have benefited playing Chelsea with a full stadium and West Ham fans very much up for it. When West Ham played very well at Liverpool, I wasn't at that game, but having been at Anfield a few times with West Ham, the allocation there is not huge. So I wouldn't have imagined that we'd have had that big an effect, although I know there was a protest that day, wasn't there? So
yeah,
probably quite boisterous. I think West Ham can get something out of it. I agree that they tend to pull a result when you least expect it. So I would feel more hopeful, actually, about the Spurs match than the Chelsea match.
Okay, so a real mixed bag there. Some of us think that, yep, we can. Some not so sure. All will be revealed on Tuesday night when West Ham visit Tottenham for our second game of the second half of the Premier League. We will, of course, all be here for the live feed once again on Eyes Up, Mother Brown. So if you're free, if you don't fancy listening to Sky or the canned sound noise, please come and join us. You will be most welcome. We, as always, or I say as always, we've only done one show, but as of last weekend, we will be taking all your questions and comments from the forum and from YouTube. So come and join in. It's good fun, and it's something a little bit different. And we'll come back to that shortly. I'm going to get your predictions before the end of the show. But there's just one more thing, one more section I wanted to touch on. I'm quite keen to push on now as we're an hour in, and we did say we were going to stick to an hour. But we've got one more bit I would like to just go through quickly. So quick answers if we can, chaps. There is a thread on the Knees Up Mother Brown forum regarding former grounds that no longer exist. I was wondering if any of you had a particular favourite ground that you do miss that we can no longer visit. Now, I think the obvious caveat here is that we can't include Upton Park because probably nearly all of us would mention that. I'm going to kick us off with Highfield Road. I had a couple of very enjoyable trips to Coventry, and there can't be many people that have said that over the years, apart from the Luftwaffe perhaps, in the 1980s. But Rio, let's start with you. What ground do you miss most, and why?
Main Road. Very much like the bowling, put in the back streets. As an away fan, you was there as an away fan, tense atmosphere, proper ground, proper old school football ground. It suffered in later years with the redevelopment, become a bit of a mishmash, but the atmosphere was good. It was intense. That's what you want as an away fan. You want to go away and know you've been under the cosh in more ways than one in some respects. Good shout. Good start. Chalks, are you still with us?
I am here.
Excellent. What about you, my friend? What ground do you miss most?
Eastville, Bristol Rovers.
That's a good shout. Of course, you're from that part of the world initially.
No. God forbid. No, I lived down there for a couple of years. I was, I was down there for a couple of years when I was in my early teens. Used to go and watch Rovers. Cracking little ground. They actually had an atmosphere and they had a racetrack. But yeah, cracking little ground. Decent club. I miss that ground. To be honest, it's all all of these new stadiums. They're like Lego boxes, aren't they?
Yeah.
So I think you could probably name most original grounds are probably missed more than what we've got now.
I should go over now to Bristol Hammer FC, I guess, who does indeed hail from that part of the world. as we can tell by his particularly strong accent. Briz, what about you, my friend? Which ground do you miss?
Well, I will say that the old Eastfield Stadium is now an IKEA, so it's not so much Lego as flat pack. But for me, it was the old Wembley Stadium. I really like the old Wembley, and the new one just hasn't got the atmosphere there. It just doesn't feel the same. I used to love going to the old Wembley Stadium and just kind of being sat in the stands and cheering England on. It just doesn't have the same feeling now.
Excellent, good stuff. Yeah, good shout. 2000, wasn't it? We played our last game there. Wasn't that against Germany under Keegan? Was that the last game?
Yeah, it was.
We lose 1-0 or something.
Yep. Yeah. Did he ham in?
That's the one. That's the one. Is that did he not resign after that? Was that Keegan's last game?
He walked out straight away.
It was, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Shame. Pinky, what about you, my friend?
Highbury.
Oh.
Yeah. Mainly because it's what it represents. And that was the moment. I mean, for most of us, we would bore everyone to death about when West Ham died and all the rest of it. I think for a lot of Arsenal supporters, that was the moment their club changed forever in the same way ours changed forever. And what have they really won or competed for since they moved to the Emirates? And I think there's a real cautionary tale for any football club chairman who are looking at pouring all of their cash into bricks and mortar when actually players on the pitch. That's it's about football. It's winning football games. And time and again, whether it's Coventry City, Bolton Wanderers, Derby County, Sunderland, whatever it may be, there aren't many clubs that have actually invested in bricks and mortar who have gone on to win trophies afterwards. And I think it's a flawed business model now, and football needs a rethink. But it's a very peculiar British thing of building stadia in many regards. So Highbury, for me, that's a lesson, a history lesson that I think football club chairman would do well to learn.
Talking of history lessons and old grounds, you touched upon Derby there, and I'm reminded of the baseball ground and that match in the 70s. I think it might have been an FA Cup game when a penalty was awarded, and the groundsman actually had to come on and paint the spot. Do you remember that? Was that Derby? Does anyone remember?
Joe Corrigan got booked.
I don't remember.
Derby against Man City, I think it was. Joe Corrigan. The referee sort of made a mark where he thought the penalty spot was.
Yeah.
Joe Corrigan then sort of paced out 12 yards, being very angry because he thought that the penalty spot was being put a little bit too close for his liking. So he paced out the 12 yards, which was slightly further than the referee had indicated. The referee booked him, and then the groundsman came on, and he came on with a tape measure and a pot of paint.
That's it.
And it was pretty much spot on where Corrigan had said it was. So.
What about you, Gnome? What would your ground be?
Briz nicked mine, I'm afraid. I was going to say Wembley. Yeah, there's an interesting little story about back in I think the 30s or 40s, when he was a youngster. Ron Greenwood was actually an apprentice sign writer.
I thought you were talking about Briz there.
No, I don't. We're not going quite back that far. But Ron Greenwood was an apprentice sign writer, and when we were there for the '75 Cup final, story goes that they were walking around the place, and Wembley didn't have an awful lot of money spent on it, keeping it up to date. And Ron Greenwood pointed to John Lyle. He said, "See that sign over there?" He said, "Yeah, that's one of mine. It had been there since the 1930s." Yeah, Wembley. I'm guessing, I suppose, not that I have an awful lot of affection for the place, but I guess got a few memories of going to the Dell as a kid, mainly because when we moved out to Hampshire in the early mid-70s, travelling up to London to get to West Ham was, for me anyway, was a bit expensive, prohibitively expensive for a 14, 15-year-old at times, whereas every now and then, if I wanted to see a football match, you could get on a bus that took forever to get from Whitchurch down to Southampton, and you'd go and see a football match. So I used to do that a few times a season. They had this very bizarre bit at one end at the I think the Archers Road end, where they had little like boxes almost, but they were terraces, sort of like a little bit like the sort of cage they used to have at over the North Bank.
Yeah,
These sort of little weird add-on bits that have been built on over here, dreadfully unsafe. And but I did that a few times, and it was a good laugh, I suppose. But
yeah,
but yeah, not an awful lot of affection for the place. And
yeah.
and the
Very,
civil service ground at Eastcote, which is now houses as well. Used to have many a good beer over there.
I think my last trip to the Dell was on the opening day of either the 1988-89 season. I seem to remember a plethora of smiley T-shirts in the crowd, and we were smashed 4-0 and ended up getting relegated at the end of that year. So not a particularly happy memory. Lastly, Frank, you must have visited a few grounds over the years in your capacity as a sports writer and journalist. Which one do you particularly miss?
Yeah, I mean, as a fan, I miss all the ones that you mentioned. Man City was a good ground to go to. I seem to remember you could bring a pint to your seat when in the latter days, and also it reminds me of when Man City didn't have any money as well. Coventry, been up there when McAvenny and Cotty wore the Roost. I think that was a particularly good trip. I think I was down at Bristol Rovers when maybe Roder was in charge. Did we play them in the League Cup and Kieran Dyer might have played? I think that was a nice.
Yeah, he busted his leg that night.
Collector's item, yeah.
Right, okay, that was the night. So all of those, I think one that West Ham wouldn't have visited very often, but I kind of enjoyed going to just for the quirkiness. When I was a young reporter, I used to work in Northampton, and Northampton's old ground, they shared it with a cricket club. So when the cricket and football seasons overlapped, there was one side of the ground that was just the pitch, i.e. the cricket pitch. There was a few fans and a rope, and that shows you how different things were. There was no stand on the third part round. But now they're at one of these new kind of out-of-town stadiums, which are fairly similar. Your concourses, there's not many new stadiums that you really warm to.
It kind of makes you how they'd cope this summer with the football season running into July. That would have been an absolute nightmare, I guess.
Well, and there was some interesting photos because they played Cheltenham in the playoff semi-final the other night, and there was people because of its location, it's in a bit of a valley, and there was little groups of people on a hill who could see the match, and which kind of brings me to the point of, if West Ham Villa is the relegation decider at the end of July, there's a big park in the vicinity of West Ham's ground. Obviously, it would be interesting how they manage that. On a hot day, are people going to want to go down to that area? I don't know.
They put some large fencing around the general sort of
have they? Right.
stadium area to stop people gathering.
Okay.
I saw a photograph of it the other week. But
yeah, they have. Yeah, but obviously you've still got quite a lot of space around in the park itself, where the protests, of course, took place in January and February, where I guess people could gather. So it'll be interesting to see what happens. Sorry, Pinky, were you going to come in there?
Yeah, I mean, I'd like to think that if we're losing in that final game, I know that there's 300 people allowed into the stadium to. Sort of medics and journalists and what have you. If we're losing that final game, I'd like to think at least some of them will try a pitch invasion to get the game called off. I mean, someone's got to do something. Let's be honest here.
Surely that's Trevor Brookings' role, isn't it?
Well, there you go. Trevor, jump the fence, on you go. But do your duty. So that's.
As long as he's wearing a mask.
Yeah. Well, let's of course hope it doesn't come to that. Thank you, gentlemen, for your memories and recollections of old grounds that no longer exist. We could have gone on, of course, much longer, but some good stuff there. Okay, we're close to coming to the end of this evening's show. One thing that I did want to do before we went, we had a competition last week to win one of these, and I'm going to bring it into shot. one of our 125th anniversary which maps of West Ham United players from the past, and we need to pick a winner. So, Chalks, can you give me a random number between 1 and 96, please, sir?
It's a toughie, isn't it?
Yeah, in your own time, Chalks.
77.
No, not that one.
I've got to count all the way down now. Okay, bear with me a second. So we are going to go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. So I believe the winner is a guy called Danny. I don't have any other information. I don't know his surname, his address, but I do have his email address. So Danny, I will be getting in touch with you after the show to find out where you live, and you will be winning one of those anniversary maps. So you can thank Chalks for that next time you see him by buying him a beer at the stadium in 2036, whenever it's open next. So we are going to do that again, actually, this week. We are going to be giving another one of those 25th anniversary maps. So all you have to do to enter is send an email. Don't need any information on it, just an email to our new email address, which is modpod@kumb.com. That's modpod@kumb.com. Simply send a message to that. You can entitle it competition if you like, to make it easier for me to dig out from all the spam that I get on a daily basis. And we will pick another winner this time next week. So well done, Danny, once again. And thank you, Chalks, for picking our winner.
Pleasure.
Two more things before we go. We're going to do the prediction competition. I seem to have briefly lost my notes, but I can tell you for a fact that we had 2 correct predictions last week. Pinky and Chalks both predicted a defeat for West Ham. You, I'm afraid, didn't get the exact score. So the way we're going to do this, it's 5 points if you get the score right, 2 points if you get the right result, and nothing if anything else. So while all of us get absolutely nothing from last week, Pinky and Chalks lead the table with a very creditable 2 points for the Wolves game. Now, Paul Walker, who was our guest last week, predicted a narrow win for West Ham. So the guest account in the competition didn't get any points. But hopefully, Frank, you can get the first points on the board for the guest account in this year's competition. So I'll start with you, Frank. West Ham Tottenham, how do you see that going? Give me a score, please, my friend.
I'm going to go for Tottenham 1, West Ham 1.
Oh, sitting on the fence. I like that. I think we'd all take that at the moment. Gnome, what about you, sir?
BBC.
Yeah. Gnome, over to you. What do you think?
For the second time this evening, I've been trumped by somebody going before me. I was going 1-1 as well.
Okay, that's fine. That's fine. Briz, what about you? Need some points on the table, buddy. What are you going to go for?
I'm going to be bold and go for a 2-1 win to us.
Oh, I like that. I like that. Chalks, how about you?
Fuck me, I'm running away with this league, aren't I? 4-0 Tottenham.
I just want to repeat that score. Is that an FOUR, 4-0 to Tottenham?
4, yeah.
4-0. 4-0. Rio, what about you, buddy? What are you going to go for?
3-0 defeat, I'm afraid.
3-0 defeat. Okay. And Pinky, we've got one West Ham win on the table tonight. Are you going to give us a second?
Don't be silly. 1-1 draw. And a point away from home is never a bad result. And it certainly wouldn't be a bad result Tuesday. So 1-1, I'll be happy with that. Okay. So I'm, as I said last week, I'm absolutely terrible at predictions, but I'm going to go for a 1-0 defeat. I can see it being a repeat of the Arsenal game where we probably put on a better performance than last weekend, but ultimately it'll be a complete waste of time. And it'll probably be a dodgy VAR decision or something like that. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for joining us tonight. Rio, thank you very much.
Cheers, mate. Thank you.
Gnome, thank you, sir.
You're welcome.
Bristol Hammer, thank you, my friend.
Welcome.
Pink Palermo, Mr. Pink Palermo, thank you again.
Pleasure.
Chalks, thanks once again for your company.
Pleasure.
And also our special guest, Mr. Frank Keogh from the BBC. Thank you very much. And I should also stress that Frank came in at very late notice after we were let down by a previous guest. So a special thanks, Frank, for agreeing to come on and do the show.
No problem. Thank you for having me.
Great stuff. It just leaves me to thank everyone who's tuned in tonight for joining us on the second episode of the Mod Pod. We will be back on Tuesday night for Eyes Up Mother Brown, our live coverage of West Ham's run-in. Of course, we'll be at, we'll be in front of the telly at home. We won't be at Tottenham as we might have been otherwise, but that's the game we're going to be focusing on. And episode 3 of the Mod Pod will be back next Sunday. So until Tuesday, thank you all for joining us. Thank you to our panel. Thank you to our guest. And come on, you Irons.
Come on, you Irons.
On your irons.
On you, Irons.
Come on, you Irons.